Imagine this. It's a quiet Sunday morning, and you're sitting with a cup of tea or coffee, scrolling through your phone. You see a post about investing in your 20s, another one about retiring early, someone talking about becoming a millionaire before 30. You pause for a second, not because you don't understand it, but because it feels like a different timeline, a different life. And then a thought quietly enters your mind. What if I'm late? Not dramatically, not emotionally, just a calm, uncomfortable question that sits there longer than you expected. Because now you're in your 40s, life is more structured, responsibilities are real. Time doesn't feel as open-ended as it once did, and money feels less like a game and more like something that needs to work. At this stage, your relationship with money is very different from what it used to be. In your 20s, money was about exploration. In your 30s, it became about building. But in your 40s, it becomes about clarity. You've seen enough to understand what works and what doesn't. You've made decisions you're proud of, and some you'd probably change if you could. And that's what makes this phase interesting, because even though time feels shorter, your understanding is deeper. You're no longer guessing, you're seeing patterns. But here's where most people make a quiet mistake. They compare their current position to someone else's highlight timeline, someone who started earlier, someone who had a different path. And that comparison creates a false conclusion that the window has closed, that wealth is something that had to be built earlier, faster, or differently. But what they miss is something much more important. The power of accumulation doesn't belong to a specific age. It belongs to consistency, structure, and time working together, even if that time starts later than expected. Because when you zoom in on your 40s, something unique appears. Your earning capacity is often at its peak or close to it. Your decision-making is sharper. Your understanding of risk is more realistic. You're less likely to chase trends and more likely to stay consistent. And consistency, at this stage, becomes incredibly powerful, not because it's exciting, but because it's stable. And stability is what allows growth to compound without interruption. Now, imagine this. Instead of looking at the years behind you, you begin looking at the years ahead differently, not as less time, but as focused time. 10, 15, even 20 years of structured, intentional investing is not insignificant. In fact, for many people, those years are the most financially productive of their entire life because the foundation is already there. Income exists, discipline exists. The only thing missing is alignment. Around this point, it's worth pausing for a moment. If you're watching this and starting to rethink what your 40s actually represent, you're on Andrew Finance, where we explore the deeper psychology behind money, timing, and long-term wealth. If this perspective resonates with you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who feels like they started too late, and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because once you zoom out further, the idea of building $1 million portfolio stops being about age entirely. It becomes about structure, about how your money flows, how it's allocated, and how consistently it's allowed to grow. In your 20s, the advantage was time. In your 30s, the advantage is capacity, the ability to contribute more, to be more deliberate, to avoid the mistakes that often slow people down in earlier years. And this is where psychology plays a critical role, because the biggest obstacle at this stage is not math, it's mindset. The belief that it's too late can quietly prevent people from taking the exact actions that would prove that belief wrong. They hesitate, they delay, they stay in a state of catching up instead of moving forward. And in doing so, they lose more time, not because they started late, but because they stopped believing progress was possible.
But when that belief shifts, everything changes. The focus moves away from the past and toward the system you can build now. You stop thinking in terms of missed opportunities and start thinking in terms of controlled outcomes. What matters is no longer when you started, but how consistently you move from this point forward. And here's something most people don't fully realize. Wealth in your 40s doesn't need to look dramatic to be powerful. It doesn't require extreme risks or unrealistic returns. It requires consistency at a level that earlier stages of life often can't sustain. Because now you have the ability to contribute regularly without constantly interrupting the process. And that uninterrupted consistency is what allows compounding to finally reveal itself in a meaningful way. Over time, something subtle begins to happen. The numbers start responding differently. Growth feels less dependent on individual contributions and more influenced by the system as a whole. Your portfolio begins to develop its own momentum, and while it may not feel fast in the beginning, it becomes steady, predictable, and eventually significant. This is where the deeper realization begins to form. Building $1 million portfolio is not about catching up to someone else's timeline. It's about creating your own system and allowing it to run long enough to produce results. Because wealth is not built in a single moment. It's built in the consistency of moments over time. And that leads to the final perspective shift. Your 40s are not a limitation. They are a filter. A stage where distractions are reduced, clarity is increased, and decisions carry more intention. The question is no longer, did I start early enough? The question becomes, am I structuring my next decade in a way that allows growth to compound without interruption? Because the truth is, a decade of focused, intentional investing in your 40s and 50s can create outcomes that feel just as powerful as starting earlier without direction. Not because time doesn't matter, but because how you use time matters more. If this video changed the way you see your timeline and your potential to build wealth, then you're already thinking differently than most.
If this video opened your eyes, make sure you subscribe, because what you learn today can save your future tomorrow.